Everyone loves a good art forgery story, especially the true ones. But for Carina Popovici, a particle physicist turned financial quantitative analyst, the very public scandal of Wolfgang Beltracchi, who spent decades successfully passing off his paintings for lost creations of famous artists, was much more than just good entertainment. It pointed her towards the prospect of finding a way to significantly improve artistic authentication practices through harnessing the rapidly developing technology of artificial intelligence. A few years later, the company she founded, Art Recognition, has become a global leader in AI art authentication, and Carina and her colleagues have published several peer-reviewed articles publicly detailing their technical advancements. But for all of those out there who see this as just another case of AI soon making humans redundant, Carina has some news for you. The success of AI's sophisticated deep learning models are intrinsically dependent on insights gleaned from the cutting edge of art historical scholarship. And, she strongly believes, they always will be. Carina Popovici, welcome to Exploring Art History.
Good afternoon, Howard. Thank you very much for having me on the show. It's a pleasure.
Wonderful. So it's a particular pleasure for me because I find the topic that you represent completely fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to getting into it. But before I do, or at least before we do, I'd like to talk a little bit about your background, because you have a background which resonates quite strongly with me insofar as you were a theoretical physicist, or you are a theoretical physicist, but you were a practicing theoretical physicist. And maybe you can tell me a little bit about that, your history. My understanding is you're from Romania and you did a PhD in physics in Germany. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about that and then your career development as you moved to found Art Recognition.
Very gladly. So yes, I did spend some time in research institutes and worked in Germany, but also in other countries actually. So I've been a researcher in the UK and Portugal and etc. So my area of expertise back then, but it's really a very long time ago, different life, like very literally, it used to be particle physics, and that corner of particle physics relates to the strong attraction between the tiniest particles that we know that are called quark. So, you know, the key word for this is quark confinement. Our viewers are probably not going to understand what that means. But this is what I've been working on. So it's really fascinating, you know, because if you're thinking about the regular particles like the electrons that are all around us, you know, as they go apart from each other, the force between them weakens. For the quarks, is exactly the opposite. As you pull them apart, the attraction between them becomes stronger. And this is something that people haven't really understood to this day, if I'm still up to date. So I I really loved that time. Very interesting research. But then I have made the first transition, which is from physics to finance. And that was very common during that period, which is 15 years ago, really. And so everybody wanted to become a quant. And so I did what most of my friends with PhDs in physics did, which was moving to finance. My stay in finance wasn't long. And so one thing that really amazed me was the discrepancy between how difficult it was to get in there and then the nature of the work itself. Like the entrance interviews are extremely competitive, like university exams really, but then you end up doing regressions, so it's a bit disappointing eventually. And then and then I had started my third, and which is still my current career, that is founding an AI authentication company. So this first move from physics to finance is not that striking, I think, because many people were doing it. But moving into the art market certainly is, and this is something that people ask me very often, how did you end up there? So, well, there are circumstances behind it for sure, and I will talk about it. But now I'm going to say something that I think I've never said before publicly. So I think that, physics and art have a lot in common, actually. And there is a beautiful book that I absolutely recommend. It's called The Age of Insight by Eric Kandel. So Eric Kandel is a neuroscientist, also a Nobel Prize laureate. And he explains that both artists and scientists are trying to create new ways of seeing the world. So both begin with observation, so literally looking at the world around us, and then try to create models of reality. And this creative methodology, if I can call it like this, is really quite similar. Physics does it in a more formal way. You collect data, you run experiments, you are trying to convert this into mathematical models, and the artists do something analogous through a more creative process, so like creating a personal model of reality. And I really like very much, this idea that these two fields are not that far away from each other, in fact, and this is something that resonates really very deeply with me. So for me, these worlds, physics, AI, science, and art, they aren't as incompatible as they might appear in the first place. Still, it is a challenge to bring artificial intelligence and art together in practice, and especially to move away from the realm of ideas to an actual product that has an actual business relevance. So, on the one hand, reflecting my values of artistic beauty, integrity, transparency, technological innovation for sure, but also the business development, the actual business relevance. And I was briefly mentioning the circumstances. So the idea itself was actually triggered by a forgery scandal. I don't know if you've heard of Wolfgang Beltracchi. So this was a forgery scandal that broke out in Germany around 2014-15, I think. And he's been making headlines after being caught fooling the art world for about 20 years, so really for a very, very long time. And it was really that context that the idea emerged, because I think from that situation, it was obvious that the art market had a problem. And, because I'm used to writing computer code, like the first question that came to my mind, is there a computer code that I can actually solve this? And it became quite quickly obvious that it wasn't. So then I said, okay, then I'll do it. So that's how it started. And at that time, we have to remember, it was 2018, 19. So AI was really very far from what we see today. And of course, I did not know back then how the field will develop. But it turned out that this idea that I had that was really somehow ahead of this time was the right one. And then we incorporated in January 2019. And the beginning was really a bit crazy. I was 36 years old. I was creating a new field of science. I was creating a new type of business, and I was becoming a mother. So I had no idea what I was getting myself with. I'm not sure actually if I was very good at handling this, at that time, also because we got a lot of attention from the press, and that was really quite intimidating. But, meanwhile, I think I was able to grow into the role, and then, learned a lot on the fly. Of course, writing the code, that was the first thing that I did, but then having to learn, writing a business plan, get the funding, build a team. So all of those things, they came like slowly and organically. And fast forward to today, I think we're really quite established on the market. I think we are doing an amazing job maintaining our leadership, because we do have some competition meanwhile. And I think what we have achieved so far as a team, really, because meanwhile we have a bigger team, it's incredibly rewarding to me. I have like really fantastic colleagues, and I'm feeling absolutely fortunate to have started this journey and then be part of it with such a great team.
Wow. Well, there's a lot to react to. My first reaction is that when you say way back in 2018 and 2019, that makes me feel like I'm 400 years old. Um, so I do have a few more questions before we move to the present day. You mentioned your interest being piqued by the whole forgery scandal at the time, but what about your previous interest in art? Have you always been captivated by art from a young age?
Yes, absolutely. So art is really my biggest passion. So paintings and visual arts for sure, but I also love poetry, theater. So I do like to nurture, an artistic side of me. And yes, no, it wasn't just the forgery scandal. Obviously, no, that there was a basis, so like like an inner fundament for this type of endeavor.
Yeah, and I want to return to this idea of starting the company because, as you alluded to, but I think needs a little bit of probing and detail. It's quite a transition. I mean, it's one thing to be. I'm imagining this may not be your situation, but it's one thing to be stuck as a quant working in a bank somewhere and getting a paycheck, but not being overwhelmingly happy. This is what I imagine would happen to me. It may or may not be applicable to you. And thinking, oh gosh, I really don't want to be doing this with my life, and maybe there's something interesting, more interesting, and then thinking about solving problems or having an art scandal come to your attention or what have you, and think, I wonder if there's a way around that. That's one thing, and it's another thing to then go ahead and actually start a company. So talk a little bit more about how that happened. Did you have people who recommended it to you? Because if you have no experience in starting a company, if you have no experience in doing that sort of thing, it can be extremely daunting and difficult to even know where to begin. So how did that whole story unfold in some degree of detail for you?
Yeah, well, it's not especially spectacular, actually. I think it's more, or it was more that kind of situation where you feel that you have seen something, like there was this problem that was really obvious, the fact that there was a massive problem around the authenticity issues on the art market. And then I felt that I had a solution that, a quick Google search would show you that it wasn't around really. And then, you ask yourself, am I doing it myself or do I let someone else do it later? And then I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. And that's really how it started. I said, okay, so I will do it. And then the rest was details, it was like such a strong, like instinctual decision, then, like incorporating and doing all the stuff that's around creating a company. It doesn't feel that daunting anymore. So it's really a matter of the perspective. Like you said earlier, what motivates you? What do you want to achieve? And at that point in time, I think I had a pretty clear vision of what do I want to achieve. Obviously, I mean, I did not know anything about the details. And I think if I did, that would have made me hesitate, perhaps, made me think 2, 3 times, 20 times. So maybe I wouldn't have done it at the end. But looking back, I'm glad it went the way it did. Sometimes it's better not to be too analytical, just do things. And then eventually it will turn out well. So that's how it was for me. It was like I said, I mean, a relatively instinctual and not thought through decision.
So let's talk a little bit about let's talk a lot, for that matter, about the work. I think when most people hear of your company, particularly when they listen to the story of how your interest was piqued, they think of an AI program to stop forgeries, maybe to be working on authentication, and you're involved in those types of activities, but it's a lot bigger than that. So maybe you can describe a little bit about the trajectory from the very beginning to where you are now, in terms of what research projects you were working on and how that's developed. And I want to move to the most recent work, as I understand it, the whole Van Dyck issue that we were talking about earlier, as a bit of a case study to be looking at things. But before I do, or before you do, perhaps you can talk a little bit about some of the early work and some of the research that as it developed up until this current point.
Yes. So first of all, I think it's really important to say that my vision from the beginning was not just to go around, finding fakes, but to really find ways to make this technology useful to people that, they, because of different reasons, they seek greater confidence, transparency, etc. in art authentication, and that those can be art professionals, collectors, or really very different categories. Now about the research itself, so we started, like I said, quite early, and we have actually received some research funding from the European Union. And we have worked together with Eric Postma, so he's still our scientific advisor. So he's from the University of Tilburg in the Netherlands. And we have written our first paper, really, which is about vision transformers. And that laid the foundation. By the current standards, that paper is old. So we have improved our architecture quite massively, actually. But still, the backbone is there. We are still using SUINs. We also have different models that are based on CNNs. So that was our first research project that we published. And then a couple of years later, we have worked on a different project that we have also published, about the importance of deep fakes, as we call them. So we have started feeding into the AI models, not just, images of real art, real in the sense of painted by humans, but also synthetics, as we call them. So AI generated forgeries. And that research, it was a bit smaller. It wasn't as of the same magnitude as the first one, but it was really quite striking because we have understood that if we feed this kind of images into the trainings, the accuracy rate of detecting human-made forgeries increased by a large factor. So I don't remember by heart. So it was a conceptually not that obvious conclusion. The fact that you feed in like AI generated art and your model performs better on human made art. But it was really like that. We've been running like several experiments, and many experiments. And since we are talking about it, I don't know if we're going to address this later, but we are actually working on another improvement. We have a prototype in the company. We haven't published it yet, but I think I can talk about it. So we are working on developing a multimodal system. So our initial and still some of the current models, they just train on images. However, we feel that it's important to also feed in a way the art historical information. So the books, there is plenty of articles, research papers, statements by art historians, whatever. And so all of this will be fed into a language model, and then we will combine the two models. So we have a new system that integrates the power of image training of the language training. So this is going to be our next upgrade.
Conceptually, it makes sense, and it points to a topic that I imagine we're going to talk a fair amount about, which is the integration of what it is that you're doing with the larger art historical background and framework. If you have all this information, which I think is perhaps the proper way to look at it, over the centuries from art historians that have accumulated painstakingly, and you want to be able to incorporate that in your models with all the different shades of gray. So the concept seems reasonable to me. One question I do have is related to that would be, I think it's kind of an obvious idea. Well, what about all this other information that we have about a painting? All this other scientific information that we have. So all the information that we have from infrared reflectography and X-rays and zillions of other techniques that I have no familiarity with, even in a passing level. But these things are building day by day by day by day. And so when one talks about information associated with a painting, you have judgments from art historians from the last 500 years to yesterday, but you also have all of this wealth of scientific information, and presumably that too is valuable information that needs to be encoded in your models, as well as the strict visual information that you're getting from the data.
I'm very glad that you mentioned it, actually, because when I talk about, visual information, I actually incorporate that as well, because they are also JPEGs, right? They are also images that we feed into the training. Also, we do have, not for all of the artists that we have trained, because it's not that easy actually to obtain, all of the infrareds, the X-rays and all of that. But for the most important artists, we have those images. And it's beautiful, we have the pentimenti of the old masters. And then we have the underdrawings, so all of this information that you are seeing underneath the surface, as you have explained, it goes into the training, but in the form of pictures, so it's, it is something like for Caravaggio, for example, we have a very good model where all of those X-rays went into the training.
Yeah. So maybe now would be a good time to start being a little bit more concrete with some of these examples, because I think it's one thing to wave your hands and say visual information or maybe linguistical information and training models and so forth. But it's another to get a slightly more sophisticated understanding of what's actually going on. I'm going to start off with the maybe it's not the most recent, but one of your more recent articles, which is the article, the Van Dyck article, as an example, because there are aspects of this that particularly fascinated me that I think would be useful for people to get a better understanding of the actual process of what it is that you're doing. So the first thing that struck me as interesting was the sheer number of challenges that you face. Again, I'm speaking as somebody who hadn't really thought about this very much. So I think, oh, okay, well, that's something I hadn't thought about. That's very interesting. So the notion that when you're looking at a painting, it's vital to be able to not only be aware of the immediate visual information, and as you say, the enhanced visual information from infrared reflectography and X-rays and all the rest of this kind of stuff, but also the restoration attempts that were actually done on that, the restoration history of the painting, because that, of course, it's obvious when you think about it, but it's not something that at least someone like me thinks about a lot. If you don't have a clear understanding of the restoration efforts that have been made over the last little while, you're minimizing that information, which will have a significant effect on how the AI models work. So perhaps you can talk just a little bit about that, because I found that particularly fascinating.
Yes, very gladly. And it's a very, very important topic. And this is something that I like to emphasize, the fact that restoration campaigns leave traces, and those traces, they influence the AI models, the AI trainings. Now, at which degree that influence happens, it really depends, because if you have a training set of, say, 500 images and 2 or 3 of them, they've been restored, maybe a little bit in a corner or so, it won't matter, it won't really make a difference. But where it does matter, and this has been really the core, so one of the most important conclusions that we have drawn during that particular study, it does matter if you analyze a painting, which had significant areas on it that have been restored, and that has been the case indeed in one of those 2 paintings that we have analyzed. So perhaps a little bit of background information for our viewers. So the subject of this Van Eyck article was comparing our AI authenticity results on restored versions and unrestored versions of two different paintings. So we are talking about 4 analyses in total. The paintings, they are different versions of the St. Francis receiving the stigmata. One of them is located in Italy, in Torino, and the other one in Philadelphia, in the US. And for each of them, we have looked at the before and after restoration kind of situation. And it was extremely interesting because for the Italian one, where we have analyzed the painting as we see it today, so with all of the restorations and retouchings, the result came out negative. So that it is not a Van Eyck, but then once we managed to dig out the original image, so we have excluded those overpainted area from the analysis, then the result turned the other way. So we see how important this is, and especially, so like if we are looking at the image that you are showing now on the screen, we see that the restored surface is really quite big, and also quite central. So that made a difference. On the other hand, on the other image that we looked at, so the Philadelphia version, as we called it, there was less over painting on it, and then we analyzed both versions, and the results, they always came negative. So these are very important and really deep elements that they must be understood properly. So this is something that we tell to our clients, really. So if there have been any restoration campaigns, any retouchings on your paintings, let us know, because it's important to be aware of them. We have a software, we have a program that excludes those areas from the analysis, and then we have the real truth. Because of course, if a model learns Van Eyck, from a data set, and then there is the hand of a restorer that overpainted it in the 1980s, the AI will not recognize the hand of that restorer, and then eventually that will overturn the analysis. So this is what happened in this case. So it's a very important example, and I think it also shows the depth of our research, the fact that we went really through the archives. We've been writing to the museums and asking the conservators and the scholars. So it's really something that people often forget. Like if you read a newspaper article that carries the headline, AI makes experts go against each other, and then there's going to be 1 or 2 lines about the Van Eyck expert saying this, and that other Van Eyck expert saying the opposite. And everything, so the entire work that has been put into this is being reduced to that. And this is very upsetting, actually, and I find it very important to highlight this. The fact that I understand that headlines, they create attention, and you want to attract attention as a journalist, whatever. But I think that mainstream media really has to understand that the reality is a lot more complex. It's quite different than that. It's important, I think, to be aware of the depth and the complexity of such projects, as opposed to how the story is being reduced, to 1 or 2, provocative sounding headlines.
Sure. So I'm looking forward to slamming the media shortly. But let's actually stick to some aspects of what you're doing and the work itself before we move to the trivialization of the world that we see all around us, because that's a never-ending topic. So one thing that was particularly interesting to me was that you used 2 different types of data sets. You used what you called a core authentic data set, and you used an expanded authentic data set. So my first question is, what are these things, and why did you do that? Why did you make that difference? Because I think that in and of itself also speaks volumes about your research approach and the seriousness that you bring to the topic.
Yeah. So maybe in order to answer that question, I need to go one step back and to explain how are these data sets created, because I think it's quite important. So we have art historians on the team that go to the library, take a pile of books, in this case on Van Eyck, come back to the office, read them, and then decide what to train on. And these decisions, they might be a bit nuanced. So the difference between the core and expanded, I mean, as the name says, essentially, so Van Eyck had a workshop. And he also worked with his brother, Hubert, who died very early, actually. And so according to the historical records, Hubert was the master. So apparently he was very gifted. There is only very little that we are left with from him. But it was really a comparative analysis for us. So the core data set includes only the paintings that are 100% attributed to Van Eyck himself, so to Jan himself. And then they expanded. It also contains the workshop contribution and that of his brother. So this is the difference between the two data sets. And for us, it was really like the genuine interest in understanding how is this structure, how are these two data sets influencing the results. And the issue is actually more general than this, because it was very common, during the Renaissance, during the Baroque period, even earlier, 13th century, whatever, the workshops existed. That's not like a 19th century problem anymore. So we have this image of the, poor and drunk painter that lives under the attic. That's more the Montmartre, version of it. But in the early days, these were almost like Rubens, for example, had a huge workshop. So it's really almost like manufactories. So what we wanted to understand is how much this is influencing the results, because in some cases, such as Van Eyck, this is very well documented. So we have good records of what was made by whom, but that's not necessarily the case for all the artists. So this would be to potentially extrapolate, to get a sense of how important is the workshop contribution.
Yeah. So again, that's a topic I'd like to get back to a little bit, but let me move, if I can, to the actual results. So you alluded to that, but I wanted to drill down a little bit into the results that from the study of the Van Eyck. And in particular, I want to focus, at least for the moment, on the Turin Van Eyck. So to me, there were a couple of really interesting things that came out. So you talked about how in the first case with the Turin Van Eyck, at first, before you took the restoration into account, the probability of authenticity was quite low, and then after they were taken into account, the probability actually switched and became quite high. But there was a difference. So that trend was the same for both data sets, for the expanded authentic data set and for the core authentic data set. And so that was interesting, but not very surprising. What was a little bit more surprising was the difference between the two data sets. So why is it the case, do you think, that there was such a large difference in terms of the authenticity for the expanded authentic data set as opposed to the core authentic data set?
So the reason, I think, is the size of the data set. So the core data set is really very small. It might be less than 20 images. And so that's why the model struggled, because the probabilities, as you are seeing, they are above and below the 50% threshold. So we can still put them in the right buckets. But the training on such a small data set was less good than that of than the training of a bigger data set. I'd like to add something here, if I may. it just comes to my mind the fact that sometimes, and this is maybe a reflection or I don't know, that sometimes it's really worth to like, if there isn't enough documented material on a certain artist to be sure of, that this is really Van Eyck or whatever, to relabel the data sets, to be like honest what we are talking about, like we are training on Rubens plus workshop data sets. Therefore, this is a Rubens and workshop analysis. So that is absolutely clear and transparent what is going on. But looking on the other side, like on the prediction side, so for example, in this St. Francis receiving the stigmata cases, we know that they have been created at some point in time where the brother was not alive anymore. So, like if we put into the training data set images that were created collaboratively by Hubert and Jan to help the training, like to have this additional information. So sometimes it helps to, build a bit of a logical inference, like what elements do we have, what was the historical background, and then like, be open about what we are training on, but then also make sure that all of the elements of the story are being included in the interpretation of the results. And this is a little bit what we've tried here, because there were many different data sets. I mean, there were 2 data sets, there were 2 paintings, there were 2 versions of each painting. So it was, the bookkeeping was a bit of a challenge. But I think we succeeded in conveying the message, here's what we've done, here's what's coming out, and here is the overall picture of what is happening. And of course, please be aware of really the complexity of this project.
Yeah. 2 other things I think worth pointing out. If you come at things with a strictly computer science type of background, often, maybe not always, because I'm not a computer scientist, but it seems often you make a distinction just on one variable, and that variable being quantity. Do you have a lot of data or do you not have a lot of data? And more data is good, and obviously the more data you have, the more you can train your model, and so forth and so on. And a really important subtlety here, as you've alluded to, is that, well, you have a lot of data, but you have to make sure by art historical terms that you have good data. So you have things that, well, the attribution may be a little bit dodgy, or so as you narrow the data sets, as you said earlier, with respect to the core data, by having less data, it means that you're a little bit, it's more nebulous where the model's actually going to go. On the other hand, there's always this trade-off between having a lot of data, which is what you'd like, and the best kind of data that you have to have. So, I mean, it's highly non-trivial, and this is where the link with the art historical community comes in. This is where the link with scholarship comes in. And so there's this extra degree of freedom with the quality of the data, not just the quantity of the data, that seems a constant aspect of your job, as it were. Would that be a fair way to say it?
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I fully agree with everything that you have said. And indeed, we also need to remember that this is a very complex, a very difficult art historical problem. Like, people don't know to this day that there is no consensus, which one is the real one, which one is the workshop one, that there is a big question mark. So this is a territory that we are trying, to like walk and trying to help clarifying this. So it's absolutely not a trivial problem that we are trying to solve, or to bring our contribution to solving it, I should say.
Yeah. And another point, which is again obvious when you read about it, but not so obvious as an outsider if you don't know about it, is that yes, you need the positive results to train the model on, but you also need to have the negative results of things that are close to that, not something that I had painted or something. You need to have results that were close in time, close in style, but we have good reason to believe are actually not attributable to Van Eyck. And this is very important, I think, for the training aspects of the model and for what it is that you're doing. So that's one point in and of itself that needs to be emphasized. And then along with that, you have these intriguing art historical links. So one thing that stood out for me was, as I understand it, there were two panels in the Ghent altarpiece that had been stolen in the 30s, and some I was going to say Dutch guy, maybe Flemish guy, but anyway, some guy whose name I can't remember, made copies of that. And that information was then suitable for the inauthentic aspect of things. So that's an interesting way of being able to say, we know this was inauthentic, we know it was very close to that, and so we can use this to actually feed directly into our model. So that struck me as, again, a fascinating combination of the technology and the art historical knowledge. But this notion in general of the inauthentic aspect being to some extent just as important as the authentic aspect is a point, I think, which perhaps deserves to be emphasized.
Yes, you are absolutely right. And yes, there is all of the art historical expertise that we have in the team. So very brilliant, very talented art historians that are doing just this, like finding, and, you have to imagine that each artist is a different world, it's a different project. So finding the information of the workshop, so transferring yourself into the, I don't know, 14th or 15th century or whatever, Dutch or Flemish, like who was learning from this great master? Were they in his workshop? Were there anonymous artists living, I don't know, across the street? Or were there artists that became great masters on their own, such as, for example, Rubens and Van Dyck? Van Dyck was his most gifted, most talented pupil. So in finding these negative examples that are very, very carefully selected, there is a lot of expertise, there is a lot of energy reading the books, looking into the archives, so finding all of that information. And yes, this is often forgotten. So we do emphasize this, we explain this when we talk about the technology, but I guess that it might come across a little bit as it's a detail, it's just something that goes in and we can quickly forget about it. But it's extremely important, the negative examples, they are as important as the positive ones. Also, from a more practical point of view, if I can say so, like one business situation, let's say, would be that a client or an art owner, they come to us and they have a workshop production, and they are asking us, is this a Rubens, or I don't know, is this a Van Eyck? And then so we need to have all of the workshop information there in the training data set, so to be able to distinguish properly a Van Eyck and a Van Eyck that has been, or a painting that has been created by his most talented pupil on the same canvas, using the same materials, using the same everything, so it's very, very important to have that information into the data sets. And I'm really glad that you have brought it up. And I do feel that I do hope that the importance of this will really come across through this conversation.
Well, now it's time to make that turn to slagging the superficiality of the media. Let me just ask you a general question. So, what is it that frustrates you the most when it comes to the way that your work and the work of art recognition is being represented?
So if I were to choose one word, that would be oversimplifying, like everything that we've been discussing so far. So, the art experts, the AI developers, the time and the energy and the resources that we put into finding the right images, finding the right books, the data sets, all of the, the brilliant little ideas that are going into, tweaking the architecture and like working on the models themselves. So none of this comes across in general in the media coverage. And I really wish, that people, well, meaning journalists, they would look a bit more underneath the surface, before making that headline, I don't know, makes experts go against each other, or things like that. So this is something that upsets me. I don't know if it frustrates me. I mean, on the one hand, I do understand, that as a journalist, whatever, you need to be quick, you need to create a narrative that is attractive, that grabs the attention. I understand that. But the fact that, all of this genuine research and all of this effort that we put into this, it completely disappears. Though this is just sad,
Well, there's that from your perspective, but I would argue, idealist that I am, that it's all very well and good to build a narrative which is attractive and galvanizes attention, but it's even better to construct a narrative which is accurate, which is true. For the average man on the street who's doesn't really know what AI is, hears these words, and it's like magic, right? It's like, well, AI is going to transform your life, and oh, by the way, AI is going to make you unemployed, and AI is going to do this, and AI is going to do that. And it's almost like this godlike thing that comes and just tells you what the answer is. And that's kind of what it seems like, I guess, if you use some of these various software packages or what have you. It's all very magical. And so you could imagine that that person has a sense like, okay, well, I know that these art historians have been arguing for centuries about, what was what and what is this. And now we've got this AI magic that's going to come along and say, that's the answer, and we're 100% certain. Without the acknowledgement that all of your models, as you just said, are, of course, based upon the accumulated knowledge and understanding that we've had from all of these art historians. So if they're all wrong, then your models are necessarily terrible. They don't do anything. And so this integration between art historical awareness and knowledge and your models is often, I think, not portrayed to people. This is a progression, it seems to me. And so rather than saying, oh no, now everything is completely different and now we've got this magic thing that'll just tell you like a god whether it's true or false, the proper way to look at it is a continuity, that this is the latest in a long line of processes of understanding, and there will be more in the future, but this is just what we're at today. Would you agree
I
with
absolutely
that,
agree.
generally?
Yes, no, of course, because I mean, as you are very rightly saying, all of this knowledge, this accumulated knowledge, is at the very heart of what we do. This is so important, like the AI cannot exist in isolation from this expertise. This is not possible, like this needs to be encapsulated in the AI training. So of course, I mean, AI cannot exist without this expertise. However, when we look at the other side, and I'd like to make one short comment before we move ahead. There is this sense, so often, or not often, but sometimes it happens that experts' opinions are not unanimous. They disagree, and then the AI might disagree. So so there is this idea that AI has done something wrong. Like the expert must be right. And if AI has returned a different result, then we need to go back and fix it and work on it until. And well, I mean, that's not how I would like to approach this kind of question, obviously, because we can't just adjust, the AI analysis following a particular opinion or anything. And this is something that people need to understand, that we don't follow expert opinions. So whatever an expert thinks about a painting or so is not going into the AI training and is not influencing the AI results in any way. So at the same time, our role is clearly not to replace connoisseurs, but to understand together in cases like this, what are the reasons for those discrepancies.
So you've been very gracious with your time. Thanks. I'd like to talk a little bit about something that you mentioned to me recently, which was your framework for responsible use of AI and art authentication. So you're not just in the business of trying to get to the next level of understanding of art authentication, you're also well aware of the fact that this this is a new terrain and a new development, and thus carries interesting and important ethical, moral, and perhaps legal implications associated with it. So you've put this framework together. So maybe you can tell me why you did that, what it contains, and what you see as the future next steps in that particular direction.
Yeah. So this has been initially a joint initiative between Art Recognition and the Center of Art Law. This is a nonprofit based in Brooklyn. And as far as I know, it's really the first set of guidelines that's created to make sure that AI is really used, like you said, responsibly, ethically, and transparently in authentication of artworks. I'm saying this because there are some other players on the market that may not be as diligent as we are in holding up the standards, and we don't want that the entire community has to suffer, so that's why we're trying to really raise the bar and make sure that everybody sticks to it, because it's not that complicated, really. I mean, there are a few core principles. Collaboration, very important, human AI collaboration, as we said already a couple of times during the conversation. Integrity, ethical development. We are really calling for the AI developers to be open about what we do. And I mean this in two ways, actually. So first is to submit their research to the peer review. So to have them, like academically thrown against the wall, so to speak, so that they really have the approval of computer science experts, whatever, but also to explain them in plain English, so that is not remaining a black box, because this is really a problem. Again, this has been a topic also earlier during the conversation. So for everybody who decides to engage this service to actually understand, like what are they paying for? So regardless of whether we talk about collectors, like lawyers, I don't know. Also, data quality, again, a big topic that we have discussed extensively. Curation, as we call it, the fact that the data has to come from reliable sources. Ideally, like match the training data with the catalog resonance, the importance of positive, negative examples. Also, this very strong call for collaboration that we are making to also be sure that all of these developments in AI, they do reflect the developments in art history, the fact that we really need to work side by side. So that's essentially the conclusion. We were trying to promote all of these ideas of transparency, responsibility, the idea of the genuine collaboration, of course, in a more consolidated way, in a document that everybody can download and can read. And I do hope that the community is adhering to these principles. It's difficult, of course, to check what everybody is doing, but this was the motivation behind it. We need like some kind of regulations, like we don't train on mutilated, on cherry-picked data sets. We train on full data sets. If we remove training images, we need to explain why we are doing and all of these things. I think that it's really important, to look at the entire evolution, right? I mean, in 2019, the art market really knew very, very little about AI. So we were really the first to introduce this idea of artificial intelligence. What it helped quite enormously is the fact that AI started penetrating our lives in different ways, right? So all of this ChatGPT and things that we've been talking about. So the fact that, entire industries have been transformed, the art market professionals at least have heard about it. Now, a large part of our work as a company and my work has been really quite educational, spending this time and dedicating the time explaining everything about the data sets, how the AI is trained, what the system can do, what it cannot do. So in a sense, developing the technology might have been easier than helping people understand it, So this has been really like quite a bit of work. And I do think there are still, as we are having this discussion, there are still some misconceptions about the AI in both ways. Some people overestimate its capabilities. Some others are completely skeptical of it. So I think there is some work to do still, like making sure that people aren't afraid anymore, that they do understand. So in the short term, I feel that this is my responsibility, just to make sure that I keep explaining until everybody understands crystal clear what this is. So if we look a bit farther ahead, things become a bit more nuanced in the sense that, yes, we want AI to become part of the standard process, alongside the expertise that already exists. There is one thing that people are telling to me and that I don't agree to, and that is, okay, you'll be working with the experts for the next 5 years or 10 years or something, but then AI will take over. So I have to say, no, AI will not take over, not in 10 years, not in 15 years. It cannot take over because of the reasons that we've been discussing, the fact that the traditional scholarship is really extremely necessary for the trainings, and that we really need to, unite forces also to continue. So just to say, very, very far in the future, I still believe in the collaboration, and I don't think that AI will take over at any point in time.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense to me because getting back to what I said before, it would be just as odd to say AI will take over than X-rays will take over or infrared reflectography will take over. It's a tool, and in order to exploit that tool, you need to make the tool work better. You need to look at other tools, and you need to have other humans that are adding other things to the system that are able to direct that process and integrate the entire process. So to point to any one given tool and say it will take over and everything else will just be some elaborate algorithm seems highly naive. But just like I can't imagine any serious art historian would go back to a time when we couldn't actually use scientific diagnostics to look at pentimenti. I can't imagine a time that in the future that any serious art historian will want to say, let's forget about all this AI business. It just doesn't seem to make any sense to me.
Yes, exactly.
Let me say one other thing to build on the framework that you're talking about. Do you think there is an opportunity or maybe even a need for, in addition to a moral, ethical framework, to have a legal framework? I don't know where we stand on all the rest of these things, and I'm sure the EU is passing laws about AI, and I'm not paying attention to it. So doubtless it belongs in that rather large and I'm sure unwieldy box. But when you're thinking about these frameworks, are you imagining a corresponding legal structure that should be involved, or are you not even intellectually going down that particular
Well, I do think that a legal structure is necessary. However, I think that's still a big gray territory. I think they are a bit more advanced in the US and not as much in Europe, but I think it's really not clear at all, what is the status of the training data sets, the copyright issues, all of these things. So what I'm seeing, and I find that's really encouraging, is the fact that the trend is, we don't want to hamper the AI developments. So the trend is towards openness. Let's figure out a way to help AI models to train properly and this kind of attitude. But I think I'm much less a legal professional than you are. So it's difficult to have an opinion, but well, we're not. I mean, it's not so much something that really concerns us because of, I mean, a very banal, a very practical aspect. The fact that mostly we train on classical art, and this is copyright free. So all of the artists that passed since more than 50 years, there is no copyright on them. So it's not a particular worry. But of course, I mean, it would be nice for the community to have a better, well-defined legal framework. I think it will come, but it will come like from the legislators. I don't think AI companies or really like business entities can actually get into the legal aspect.
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting that you say that it's more advanced in the United States, because the last time I looked, they didn't even believe in the rule of law. But that's a whole topic for another day. So, Carina, I'd like to thank you very, very much for your time and your very prudent and probing comments. I think they were wonderful, and hopefully people will have a much better informed and more comprehensive understanding of what it is that you're doing and why it's so important. I had a wonderful time talking to you.
Thank you so much, Howard. It was an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. And thank you for the very good questions and comments. And I hope your viewers will enjoy it.
Thanks very much for watching this video podcast. For more engaging art-related content, check out our Exploring Art History Substack, our short films on our Exploring Art History YouTube channel, and Ideas Roadshow's full-length documentaries. Visit our website, ideasroadshow.com, for more details.